Today we're going to show you how to install BILSTEIN B16 coilovers on this F80 M3. This is Brian, thanks for watching Keys Motorsports. If you like our videos, give us a thumbs up, make sure to subscribe, and check us out at keysmotorsports.com. I love the F80 M3, but it's set up to go off-roading, and today we're gonna change that by adding the BILSTEIN B16 coilovers. Now, something that is super cool about these is they feature DAMPTRONIC technology, which is going to plug directly into the factory EDC. Now with the BILSTEIN B16s, we're able to lower the front of the car between 30 and 40 millimeters and the rear between 5 and 25. Now today's video is part one of part two. What we're gonna do in today's video, we're just gonna show you how to install this. We're gonna go step by step. We're gonna take our time, make sure you have a good understanding of what's involved to install these. Then what we're going to do, as you may know, suspension needs to settle a little bit. We need to get in alignment. So we're gonna let all of that happen, and then in a couple weeks, we're gonna come back with a full review of the system. Now, before we get started with today's installation, let's take a measurement of the ride height. Now, I know some people like to go center of the wheel. Some people like to go from the ground. We're not going to be changing the wheel, so we're just gonna go from the ground, take a rough measurement. So we're at about 27¼ inches. So that's our front measurement. Let's switch it over to the back and see where we sit. All right, let's grab a quick measurement of the rear. So the rear is about 26½. Now, I actually don't mind this wheel gap. I think this looks fine. We are going to lower it ever so slightly, but it's really the front that drives me nuts. I mean, let's go see if it passes the shoe test. Nope, it fails horribly. So with that, let's get started with today's installation. We are going to be starting on the front, then we're going to work our way to the rear. So to do this, we need to disassemble a couple pieces here. We need to take off the carbon strut. We need to take off the side plastics here, and then this aluminum brace underneath. So with that, let's grab a 10mm wrench. We're gonna use an open-ended socket, and then also a trim tool. So if you start up here, we're gonna remove this piece of plastic. I've already loosened it, but basically what you do is you just twist these counterclockwise, just about 90 degrees, and then that's going to release the clip. Then you can take your trim tool, and you need to remove this plastic rivet over here. So what you do is you lift up on the center, like that, and then you just lift up on the bottom part. So it's gonna sit in there like that. Once you've done that, you can lift it up, pull it out, and set this in a safe place. So on this side, you do the exact same thing. We've already loosened it. There's another one of those clips over here, and then there's one more right down here. So same thing as before, you lift out that centerpiece, and then the entire thing will pop out. And then you can take the rubber and just set it over here out of the way, pull this up and over, and put it in a safe place. Now for this next part, you can either disconnect the battery. I'm just gonna stick a rubber glove over our positive terminal right here, just to make sure that nothing touches that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove some of this rubber right here. So to do that, we have more of our little fasteners here. So again, just lift up the center, pull it up and out. There's another one over here. Okay, just like that. Then we're gonna take our sensor right here, pull it straight up like that. We set it over to the side. And then here, since our car has EDC, you're gonna just get this, and you pop it up like this. And there's not really a trick to this. You basically just get it and just pull it straight off. And then do the exact same thing on the other side. Now that we have those out of the way, it's time to remove the carbon strut brace. Now these are typically held in by 13mm bolts and one 10mm. So we're gonna start with that 10mm, and it's located right over here, and it secures the carbon strut brace to the coolant reservoir. Next, we're going to remove those 13mm bolts. Now the ones in the front, you'll notice, are little short ones like that. And the ones in the rear are typically a little bit longer. Now, depending on what year your car is, these may be Torx instead of 13. So at this time, let's remove the rest. Then what you can do once you've done that, take your carbon strut brace and put it in a safe location. Now that the carbon strut brace is off, we are going to pull the wheels off. So to do that, we are going to lift the car using a lift. Now, I do want to say that you do not need a lift to do this process. You could do the exact same thing on a jack and jack stands. Now, to help you see what it's like to use a jack and jack stands, we're gonna keep the car as low as we can, assuming we can get the camera angles we need. There are going to be some situations where we're gonna put the car up pretty much all the way, just so you can see and have a good understanding of what's going on. So with that, let's raise the car just a little bit off the ground and pull the wheels off. The next part of the process, we need to remove this gigantic brace over here because it covers some of the bolts. So to do that, we're going to need our 10 millimeter, and then we have some E-Torx. So let's start with this 10 mil. Okay, set that to the side. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take a pick tool, and you need to pry out this guy, and then we're finally ready to remove all the rest of these bolts. Now with these E-Torx here, the little ones here, these are E12, so there are 3 over here by the strut, and there's 1 over here and 1 over here, and then down in this little hole right there, there's an E14. So at this time, let's remove them from this side and also the other side. And then these 2 up here are 16 mil. Next, what I like to do, I like to flip up this little piece of plastic right there, and then especially if you're doing it just with one person, just be super careful. Get that out of the way. I typically tilt it up and then slide it out like that. Next, what we can do is we can start to disconnect some of these connections to make sure that we're going to not overextend them when we go to take the strut out. The first one I'm going to do is right up here. You just press on the back tab and pull it down just like that. So what I was doing over there, you just press in this little section right there and it'll slide right down. Now once you've done that, you want to do is just very carefully, if you use like a rotating motion, that normally works best, but we'll take that out of there. Next, we're going to disconnect ABS. Now when you're doing this on the driver's side, you need to make sure that you disconnect the brake wear sensor as well. So just pop it out of there, pop this open, and then slide this out. And then you just press on this little tab right there. And then that'll pull apart like that. And then you can slide that out just like that. Next, we're going to remove the end link bolt, which is up here. You're going to need a 16 millimeter. Now I like to use one of these pass-through because, as you'll see, there is a T30 that's needed to go in between. So what you do is you set this up, and then you set your T30 to tighten, and you set your open-ended wrench like this to loosen. Okay. Now what I like to do, just so I don't lose any nuts or bolts or anything, I'll just hand thread that on just like that. Okay, next what we're gonna do, we're gonna just put this jack under here to support behind on the knuckle there. And then you're going to need a 16 mil on this side. There's a bolt that pinches this assembly all together. So you need a 16 on this side and a 16 on that side. And then we'll slowly remove this. Now, once you remove this, it shouldn't just drop or anything like that, because you're going to need a spindle spreader tool, but it's possible that it could slip down a little bit. But having the jack is going to make sure that everything stays protected. Okay, then what you can do, remove this bolt. And what I like to do is I like to put them on the ground how I took them out. So if it's front to back, I'll put it like this, or back to front, I'll put it the other way. Let's put that right over there. Then once that's out, you just gently slide that bracket out. At this point, we're ready for our spindle spreader tool. It's basically a little tool that's shaped like an oval. And basically it's going to go in here, and then you're just going to turn it 90 degrees, and that little bit is going to spread this enough to be able to get the strut out when we're ready for it. Now, when you're doing this on the driver's side, you need to make sure that you take a 10 mil and you remove the nut over here and pull this off. Basically what this is if you have xenons in your car, it's a headlight leveling sensor. So it's gonna make sure that your lights are staying nice and level. And if you lower this down, you're gonna rip it apart. So make sure that you disconnect that before lowering it down. Now what we can do from the top, we're gonna take our 16 mil and there are 5 of these bolts that we need to remove. So carefully take them all out. Now before taking this last one out, make sure that it is supported with a jack because it will drop otherwise. So now, sometimes it helps if you have a little lubricant on here. And we'll take out that bolt that's holding everything from the top. We still have our spreader in there. And then you can slowly lower this down. I don't like to have no pressure on it at all. And then what you should be able to do, and then I can just rock this up like that. Make sure you're not hitting at the top. And I'm gonna get the jack out of the way. Press down on that, and this whole thing will slide out. So now what we're going to do, now that we have the stock strut and spring off, we're assembling our strut compressor, or spring compressor. Now I like this style. This is by far the safest one. You see some really cheap ones on eBay. I would spend the $100 or so and get this one, or see if a local auto parts store has one. Because a lot of times they have them where you can actually go and rent them and they don't even charge you. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna line this up with the spring. If you are using this style spring compressor, you never wanna use any kind of impact wrenches or anything like that. You always wanna do everything by hand. Okay, so basically with this, you're going to line it up. I have a little ways to go here still. Okay, then what we're gonna do, we're gonna crank this down. Okay, and then once you can get the top hat and spin it around, that's pretty much how you know that you've gone as far as you need to. So if you look in the top here, you're going to see that the center portion here is a 10 millimeter, and then that nut is a 12.18 millimeter. Now there's 2 different ways you can do it. As you saw earlier, I like to use this little one that has a little through-way thing there so the bolt can stick all the way through. Otherwise, they make a socket. I don't have one here. Basically, it's like someone cut it with like a Dremel or something. And then you can get your wrench in the inside. The problem with that is you have such limited space, and honestly, it's kind of a pain in the butt. So what we're going to do is I have a 10 mil. Now you will notice that this is a 1/4 with a 3/8 adapter. With a 1/2 inch adapter, that's going to give me the leverage that I need, and the little one still fits through. So we're gonna line up the bottom one, line up the top one, and then you set this one to loosen and this one to tighten, and that's just going to hold that in place. And then, there you go. Actually, wasn't that bad. Then you can remove that nut. Now, even though we have the spring compressor on and everything should be pretty good, it's always a good idea to keep your face away from this general area, especially as that nut gets looser and looser. Okay, so we have this just about out. Okay, so once you've done that, take your top hat, take it off. We are going to reuse this. We are also going to reuse part of this, but we are not going to use the bump stop because the BILSTEIN ones actually have one that's built inside. Next, we need to take off this sensor. It's held on with an E10, so just be very careful. These sensors are very fragile. Then what you can do is you can get your new strut, and you want to make sure that everything lines up the same. So you can see that we have this portion here with the hole for the end link, and it's in the same position, and then the top part is also in the same position. If everything is in the same position, you have it correct. If it doesn't quite match up, that means you have the wrong side on. So now what we can do, we're going to just reinstall our little sensor here. Now what you're gonna do with the dust cover, you're gonna cut it. I'm just gonna cut it right about there. Just be careful you don't cut your hand. And we're going to reuse this top part. So then we're going to take it, and this part right here is going to line up with the end of the spring. So it's gonna sit just like that. So that's gonna go over it. And then sometimes you have to compress the springs. It all depends on how low you want to have your car from the get-go. I'm actually going to put it pretty much all the way down. Bilstein will give you some of the best ride, some of the best suspension on the market. They're not known for being the lowest, which I don't want to be the lowest. I don't want to be scraping all the time. I just want incredible suspension. So just something to note about that. Then we're going to take our top hat. We're going to put it on, and you can take your washer, throw that on there, and then we're gonna torque this bolt down. Now the Bilstein setup is a little bit different. It is a 22 mil nut with a 6 mil hex. So I actually have a suspension kit we're going to be using for this one. Okay, so we're gonna get that. And then this is 7/8 for what that's worth. And then this up top here is a 12. So now what we're gonna do is we are going to torque this to spec. And we're gonna have all the torque information down in the description for you. Okay. Now with this, I wanna have a little bit of preload. I don't like it when the spring can just float around like that. I wanna have a little pressure in there at all times. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my spanner wrench here, just twist this around a little bit until I start to get a little bit of tension. Okay, so that should be good. And then what you can do is there are actually little Allen bolts in here, I guess they'd be. So I'm going to go grab an Allen wrench, and I'm just going to snug these up to make sure that this stays locked in place. So this is a 3mm. Just gonna snug this up. There's another one on this side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to count the threads. I just see about 3 exposed threads, and I'm gonna match it on the other side before we install that. So now it's time to install our new strut. You wanna make sure that the wire's down, and you wanna make sure that this little notch right there is gonna go in that little groove where we have our spindle spreader. So, and then the other thing, you wanna make sure that your top hat is lined up. So if you just line it up, you should be able to see where the notches are and where the bolts go. I'm gonna put this up here like that, and we'll feed this through. And if you put it up like this, it's gonna help you try not to hit your fender or anything like that. Okay. Again, you want to line up that back there. And then it'll slide in like that. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just support this a little bit. You wanna just make sure that you give a little wiggle and make sure that that is all the way down. Then you can take out your spindle spreader tool, and we'll just put that on the ground for now. Then what you can do is start to jack this up here. And you can start to guide the top hat up the top. So if your top hat isn't completely lined up, as long as your spring, as long as you don't have it set up where you're gonna have a super high ride height, you should be able to just spin it by hand. Okay. Then I can pop it up in place. So right now we have the suspension supported. You just take a couple bolts and put them in so nothing drops down. Now we can take our end link, pop it back through. Now sometimes if it's fighting you a little bit, all you need to do is just rotate it ever so slightly, and it should help you to get it through. Okay, and then since we have our spindle spreader tool out, we're gonna put this little bracket back on, this little piece right there goes in the hole. And then remember, the bolt goes from the front to the rear. And we could plug in our sensor over here. And we could take our little grommet here. Again, it works best to be kind of like twist and rotate it in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tighten our end link here. Again, this is with a T30 in the middle, and then it has there's a 16 on the outside, and then torque it to spec. So now what we need to do is we need to connect that little wire that's hanging down from our strut, and we need to connect it up here. So to do so, you're going to need this little wire that BILSTEIN provides, and I'm going to reach down in the engine bay and I'm going to feed it through right over here. So when you're doing this, when you look down, you can just literally look down and see daylight. So then what we'll do is we'll route this around here, and we're going to get the little zip ties that are included. I'll just throw one in now to hold this, and you're going to zip tie it to here. Just like that. And once you have it in place, you can get this little cap, and gently with a rubber mallet, you can tap it on the bottom. You want to just make sure that before you do that, that your wire is lined up in the groove. So here, I'll show you on the other one here. So you take your wire, you put it through this little groove, and then you take this and then you just pop it on with a rubber mallet. So what you do now is you take off this little protective cap, and you line this up. I'm going to line up this little hole right there with this little clip. You're going to press it in until it clips into place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it up over here. And just put a couple other zip ties so it doesn't bounce around. Let's do it over here. And you want to make sure that you do some testing so that as this is moving around, there's not going to be any extra tension or anything on that wire. Once you've done all that, you can just pull this cord through just like that, and I'll show you where that plugs in up above. So then we can take our new connection, we'll unplug the old one, set that to the side. I'm going to route this up through here, and then we can plug that in just like that. And then we can go back, and I'm just going to put some zip ties on here just to hide it a little bit. Now, one thing I didn't note is that, as you can see here, I have an aftermarket intake. If you have the stock air box, you will have to pull that out, but if you're not really sure how to do that, we'll link a video for you down in the description. Now what we can do, I'm going to finish torquing all of these down, and then we can go back, clean up all those zip ties, and then we're going to do the other side. Now, when you're doing the other side, it's very important to note that the other side has that headlight leveling sensor. So you just want to make sure that you disconnect that. It's a 10 mil, and just be careful because it is part plastic. But just lower that off. Otherwise, when you lower the control arm down, you're going to rip it off. So just take that note. We're going to do the other side off camera, and we'll see you in the back. At this point, we are done the front. Everything is torqued down. And then we actually went through and we put everything back in the engine bay. So you just do everything in the reverse order. We have all the torque specs in the description for you. Now the rear, I think, is a lot easier because you don't need spring compressors and all that. We decided that we are going to do this in the air, but we're gonna show you how to do it if you're doing it on your back with a jack and jack stand. So basically there are a couple components. So first you have your camber adjustment bolt. Before you get started, you want to mark this. What I like to do is I just take a Sharpie and I mark it here. I mark it over here. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. Just mark it over here. And over here. And what the heck, we'll just mark it up here too. So you do 2 or 3 different points, so you know exactly what is going to be where. And so this bolt right here is what controls your camber and how much positive or negative camber you have. You're gonna have to get your car aligned after you get this done, but you wanna get it close. So if you keep it as it is now, you should be fairly close and the car will be drivable. You shouldn't have any issues getting to the dealer to get it aligned. So this is a 21 mil. And then we have this nut and bolt right here. I believe this is an 18 mil. And then this is what holds your shock in. If you follow the shock up, here you have 3 E-torques that need to be removed. You have to be very careful if you have electronic suspension, because if you look right there, you're gonna see that there's a connection. If you fail to disconnect that and you just rip your shock out, you're gonna mess up your wiring, which is a bad day. Also, we're going to disconnect this connection over here. And then the last thing, so that's pretty much everything for this side. And this holds my reminder to show you the driver's side. Now the difference is on the driver's side, just like we had up front, you have your headlight leveling sensor here. So this is a 10 mil, and then this is a 10 mil. So same as you did before, I just left that out so that I could show you. Now, while we were getting all of the lighting and whatnot set up, I just did this side. So this is what it's gonna look like once everything is fully installed. The last note I have before we get started is I put these bolts in, but we didn't tighten them down. The proper way to do this is you wanna have all of the load correct, like the car was sitting on the ground. Otherwise, your bushings and whatnot can get all twisted and funky. So once we get everything in and just hand tight, we're gonna lower the car off the lift, and then I'm going to put the back on ramps. And then what that's going to do is it's going to simulate the car being at a normal ride height. I'm gonna slide under, and then we're gonna torque both of those bolts. But with that, I'm just gonna put this back in here before I forget, and then we'll get started. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna start by releasing some pressure because the spring is pressing down. Now, if you're doing this on your back, on the ground, I've actually done it way more times that way than on a lift because it's just so easy. But basically the big thing is making sure that your jack is positioned in the correct location. So what you do is you just take your jack and you just put it under here. And we'll relieve a little bit of tension. If you're doing this on a lift, be super careful. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to release this bolt here. Now, when you're doing this, you have a nut on this side and then you have a bolt. What I would recommend is always keep the bolt steady and then twist off the nut. The reason for that is because this has a little flange on it that adjusts your camber. You don't want that just like constantly rotating and rotating and rotating. Where if you do it from the other side, you can just rotate the nut off and then it has that other little piece, which I will show you in 1 second. The other thing is I always like to do this just with basic hand tools. And it's not normally that difficult. Okay, so here's that little piece that I was telling you about. It has these 2 little indents that go into the actual bolt. Now, when you're at this point, you can just slowly rotate it, and what'll happen is you'll feel, once you get to a certain point, like right now it's getting a little tight and then it just got really loose. Once you get to that loose part, it's still gonna be a little bit tight, but you're going to be able to get it out a lot easier. So you can just take this and slide it off, and then I literally have it so there's no tension at all. Now the other thing that I like to do, as many of you know, I like to put the bolt on the ground as it came out. So this one went from the rear to the front, and then the one that holds the shock in is from the front to the rear. So I'm just gonna put this up here on my lift arm so we don't lose it. So now we can disconnect the connection over here. So all you need to do is press on this little tab and then pull it down. So I'm gonna get in your way for just 1 second. Okay, and then right here, you have your wire that's clipped in. You're just gonna disconnect it and just pull it to the side. And then on this side, we have an 18 and an 18. So just disconnect that. And then again, as long as you have a little pressure under here, this should literally just fall out. You can see there's no resistance at all. Okay, then I'm gonna put that over here so I remember where that goes. And then at this point, what we're gonna do, everything is disconnected as far as this connection is concerned. I'm going to slowly lower this down, like so. Don't worry, the spring pressure, it's not gonna just fling out at you or anything. There's actually still gonna be a little tension on it. So when we pull this over here, you're just gonna pull this down a little bit, and you can pull up and out of the spring. Just be careful you don't smash your fingers in there. Now I will say on the bottom, on the bottom of the spring here, you're gonna need to take this rubber thing, and this is actually going to go back. Now, if you can look under here, now when you go to reinstall this, you'll notice that there's this little peg. The peg goes in the outermost hole. There's 2 holes, but just in case you get confused on how it goes, that's the way that it comes from the factory. Now, while you're down there, you will notice this little cup up here where the spring used to sit. You need to get that out because it's not reused with the BILSTEIN B16. Just take a mallet, just ding it out, and set that to the side. So now what we're gonna do, I'm going to lower the car down so I can get the shock here out without messing up the electronics. So I'm gonna get my E-Torx ready, gonna lower the car down, and then we'll continue on. Okay, so I'm taking E12 and remove the 3 amigos here. And then be careful because once we get this last one down, we're gonna lower it down. This part up here is separate from this part, and the wire goes in between them. So a lot going on. All right, so now we're just gonna press down, and this is gonna pop apart like so. Let me just see if I can get this in a better position for you. But this is where you don't wanna just rip it out because you can mess up this connection. But just like on the other side, you just take this connection and pull it straight up. So now we're in the safe zone. So you can just pull down and pull this guy out. Okay, so now what we're gonna use my little 18 12-point through wrench, and then we have a 10. And we're gonna loosen this one here. Okay, and with this, you're gonna pull it off, bump stop and all. And you're gonna put it on the new one. And you can torque it down. Okay. Golden. Now, when you're reinstalling that connection, just like the front, it has, it kind of looks like, we'll say a cross or so, and 2 of the sides are kind of fat and 2 of the sides are a little bit skinny. So you just have to make sure that when you plug the connection back in, that you're plugging it in the right way, or it's just not gonna fit and not gonna work. And then while you're here, you need to move your sensor over. I'll put it on here. I just snug them up. I don't think there's an actual torque spec. You don't want to go too tight because it is plastic. So now I'm going to go in here. The sensor is going to go towards the left. We'll just pivot this around. I'm going to go down and around. Start to line up this down at the bottom. We're going to take the sensor. I have a good sense of how it's going to go in. Okay, so just like that. Clip that in, and then you can take your bolts, tighten those back up, and you can torque all these down. Now in your kit, you will have a little piece of plastic that looks like this. This is gonna plug in here, but instead of having this flop around, BILSTEIN gave you this little zip tie thing here, which is gonna keep everything nice and neat. And you'll notice, I'll show you in a second after I cut off the excess, and it's gonna slide on right here. And once you've done that, while we're here, I'm just gonna take this and plug it in. Now with that all installed, we are ready to set our ride height. And this is, as you can imagine, it's a little bit of trial and error. I'm just trying to make sure that they're even from the get-go. So what I did on the other side, I did 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I did about 10 threads. And I'm going to tighten these together so that nothing moves. Okay. So then you're going to take that little piece of rubbery plastic that we removed earlier, and you're going to get the end of it, and that's going to clip onto the end of our spring, just like that. And then, as you may remember, this little piece of rubber is going to go through this hole. So to do that, I'm just going to pull down. We're going to lift this up. We're going to line that up. Don't pinch your fingers. Then we're going to add the top portion. Now make sure that this blue piece of plastic sits on the spring, and then the rubber protects the metal on metal contact. I'm going to take this down, go around, drop that in there, and then put that up just like that. Okay, last part of the process, we're going to carefully jack this up again, since we have some tension from our spring. Now, as you're doing this, you want to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. If anything is not, what you can do is just like take a screwdriver and stick it through, and you can maneuver the inside of that a little bit. But if you're not watching and guiding it, it's not going to line up. Or maybe you get really lucky. I'm just going to tap it in to help me get everything lined up. Put it in just like that. Okay, so then we can take our camber adjustment bolt. Just put it in like that. It doesn't have to be perfect quite yet. And then I'm gonna just take the tension off of this, since it's supported by the bolts. Okay, so you'll notice I don't have it fully pushed in. I'm just going to take my wrench and just wiggle it in. Then on the other side, we're gonna pop this little piece in on this piece, like so. What I like to do is just take a look on the other side, put your wrench on, wiggle it around, and you probably heard that snap in. So if you look at it on this side again, you'll see everything is on. We can put our bolt on. We're not gonna tighten anything yet. So what you wanna do now, we're gonna take our wrench here, and I'm gonna slowly twist it until my markings are where they started. Okay, so that looks pretty good for where we started. And then if we take a look at the back, everything looks good there as well. So take your ratchet, and you want to go from the nut side, and you want to hold everything still with an open-ended wrench. And that's just going to make sure that your alignment is going to stay put. Now, we're not fully tightening it. We're just tightening it ever so slightly so that we can put the car down, and then we're going to do the final tighten once we have all of the load. So same thing with this bolt right here. This is the 18 if you forgot. Take your 18 and just snug that one up too. So now that all of that is done, what we need to do is we're going to put the wheels back on, lower the car all the way, and then we're going to jack the rear up. We're gonna put it on these ramps we have over here, and then we're gonna do a final torque on this guy, and then over on these two, and then we're gonna check out how the car looks and take it for a drive. So what we just did is we chalked the front, we torqued down the wheels, and then we jacked one side up, lowered it down, and then we're gonna jack the other side up here, carefully lower it down on this ramp, again to simulate the car being on the ground. But now we have about 8 inches extra space where I can slide under and torque everything down. All right, now it's time to torque everything down. And while you're in this super comfortable position, do the same thing on the other side. This part of the process, everything is done. We're gonna get it off these ramps, and let's go check out how good it looks. So as you just saw in some of that B-roll, this suspension setup looks incredible. And what we're gonna do now is we're going to drive around for a couple days, we're going to get everything aligned, and then we're gonna come back once everything is settled. We don't wanna just drive around right now and it's like, oh, it's awesome, it's great. It feels like this. Because it's not really a true sense, because the suspension has to settle and I need to get it properly aligned. So once we do that and we get a chance to actually drive it, you know, on little back roads with twisties and also on highways and whatnot, we want to give you a really good video on an accurate representation of what it's like to live with the suspension. So if you're interested in Bilstein or other great products, be sure to see the links down in the description. Once again, my name is Brian. Thanks for watching Keys Motorsports. If you like our videos, give us a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe and check us out at keysmotorsports.com. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.